The man in the black coat didn't even look back. He raised his hand, made a single gesture, two fingers lazy and slow like he was ordering dessert, and the shot cracked through the cold Chicago night before Avery ever heard the footsteps behind her. She didn't feel pain at first. She felt the sidewalk, concrete against her cheek, the smell of rain and exhaust, and the sound of her own delivery bag skidding across the wet ground. She tried to push herself up. Her arm gave out. Something warm was spreading through her side, soaking through her jacket, and the last thing she saw before the darkness pressed in was a pair of polished shoes stopping inches from her face. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel right now. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Avery Cole was not supposed to be on Meridian Street that night. She had already logged 3 deliveries and was about to close the app when the order came through: 1 bag, 1 pickup restaurant called Vitali on North Wabash Delivery to an address 6 blocks east. The payout was $42. For a Tuesday night, that was almost too good to ignore. She was tired. Her feet hurt. She had been on her feet since 5 in the morning, first at the coffee shop, where she pulled espresso shots and memorized the names of regulars who barely remembered hers, then straight into the delivery rush that didn't quit until the city got cold enough to keep people inside. $42 was rent math. She accepted the order. The restaurant was the kind of place she had passed 100 times without ever going in. All dark glass and brass lettering, and the kind of quiet that meant expensive. She locked her bike to the pole out front, checked the order on her phone, and pushed open the service entrance, the way the app instructed. A hostess met her at the door with the kind of smile that said she was being tolerated rather than welcomed. The bag was heavy. Whatever was inside was packed with care, insulated, tied labeled with an address she didn't recognize and a name she couldn't pronounce. She didn't ask questions. That was the job. You picked up, you delivered, you moved on. She had the bag strapped across her back and was halfway down the block when she heard the voice. "Hey, delivery girl." She slowed but didn't stop. Chicago had taught her years ago that responding to strange men on empty streets after dark was a math problem with only one right answer, and that answer was, keep walking. "I said, hey." The footsteps behind her were fast, too fast. She turned just enough to see the shape of him. Tall, dark jacket, something wrong about the way he was moving, too deliberate, too focused. And then her instincts screamed before her brain caught up, and she pivoted hard to the left, and the shot went through her right side instead of her spine. The sound was enormous. It filled the whole street and then vanished, swallowed by the city, and she went down. The concrete came up fast. Her hands hit first, then her knees, then her shoulder, and she rolled onto her back because her body was trying to do something useful and couldn't decide what. She pressed her hand against her side. The warmth was immediate and wrong, and she looked down and understood what was happening, even though some part of her refused to believe it. She had been shot. She was on the sidewalk outside an Italian restaurant in the middle of Chicago, and she had been shot, and nobody was screaming, and nobody was running, and the street was almost completely empty. She heard the service door of the restaurant bang open. Footsteps on the pavement, 2 sets, then 3 voices in a language she didn't speak. Someone crouched beside her, and she pulled away on instinct, and the pain that flared through her side made her gasp so hard she nearly blacked out. "Stop." The voice was low, direct, not unkind, but not gentle either. "Don't move. Let me see." She opened her eyes. The man kneeling over her was not what she expected. He was somewhere in his 40s, dark-haired, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, and his expression was not the expression of someone stumbling across a stranger in distress. It was focused, controlled, the expression of someone who had seen this before and knew exactly what it required. His hand pressed down on her side and she cried out. "I know," he said. "Keep still." "Get off me," she managed. I don't know you. You've been shot." He said it flatly like a correction. "You're bleeding. If you move, you will bleed faster. So keep still and let me help you." She looked up at the men standing behind him. 2 of them, both large, both watching the street with the kind of alertness that had nothing casual in it. One of them said something in Italian, and the man kneeling over her answered without looking up. "What are you saying, Bao?" Avery said. Her voice was thinner than she wanted it to be. "What's happening?" Who are you? My name is Alejandro Vitali. He glanced at her once quickly, then back to the wound. I own this restaurant. You were making a delivery. A statement, not a question. He had already connected the dots. Someone shot me. Yes. Why would someone shoot me? I'm a delivery driver. He didn't answer immediately. He looked up at one of the men behind him and issued a string of quiet, rapid instructions. The man was already moving before he finished speaking, pulling out a phone heading toward the door. Can you walk? Alejandro asked. I think so. That's not what I asked. Can you walk? She tried to push herself up, and the world tilted badly, and his hand caught her arm before she went sideways. Okay, she said. Maybe not. Then we're going inside. He looked at the second man, Marco. Marco was at her other side before she could protest, and the two of them lifted her in a way that was practiced and efficient and told her without any words at all that this was not the first time either of them had carried a bleeding person off a public sidewalk. She should have been more frightened by that. She was in too much pain to be properly frightened by anything. They brought her through the service entrance, through a corridor that smelled of garlic and warm bread, and something metallic she realized was her own blood, and into a room at the back of the restaurant that was not a kitchen or a storage room. It had a couch, a desk, a locked cabinet, and a landline phone. It looked like somewhere a person could disappear and nobody in the dining room would ever know. They laid her down on the couch. Marco pressed a folded cloth against her side and she hissed and grabbed his wrist. Easy, he said. He was maybe 30, dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset at least once. His voice had a faint accent she couldn't place. Pressure. It slows the bleeding. I need a hospital, she said. Yes, Alejandro said from somewhere behind her. We've called someone. I need an ambulance, not someone. Our doctor will be here in 8 minutes. He came around and stood in her line of sight, which she was beginning to realize was deliberate. He wanted her to see his face. He wanted her to focus. 8 minutes is faster than any ambulance in this part of the city on a Tuesday night. I need you to stay calm and stay awake. I'm awake, she said. I'm very awake. I'm awake and I've been shot and I don't know what is happening. What's your name? She almost didn't answer. Avery. Avery. He repeated it like he was filing it somewhere. How old are you? 26. Why does that matter? It doesn't. I'm keeping you talking. He pulled up a chair and sat down, which surprised her. She had expected him to be on his phone barking orders, not sitting 3 feet away watching her with that steady, unreadable expression. Tell me what you remember. Someone called out to me. I turned. I heard the shot. She stopped. The pain was a sustained pressure, now sharp when she breathed too deeply. He was already aiming. He was already aiming when I turned. It wasn't random. Alejandro's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. You saw him, he said. Not well. Dark jacket, he was tall. She paused. There was something on his wrist, a tattoo. I only saw it for a second. Marco said something in Italian, short-clipped. Alejandro held up a hand. Later. Then to Avery, you're going to be fine. The bullet went through the side, not the abdomen. The doctor will confirm, but I've seen enough wounds to know the difference. How comforting, she said, and was mildly surprised to find she meant it sarcastically rather than desperately. The shock was probably still doing that, keeping her from fully understanding the weight of what had just happened. You have a good sense of humor for someone bleeding on my couch, Alejandro said. You have a lot of nerve for someone who just carried a stranger in off the street without calling 911. He looked at her steadily. Would you prefer I had left you on the sidewalk? She didn't have an answer for that. The doctor arrived in 7 minutes. She was a woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back carrying a bag that looked far too professional for a house call. She spoke to Alejandro in Italian for approximately 30 seconds, during which Avery caught the words for nothing useful, and then she crouched beside the couch and looked at Avery with the direct impersonal assessment of someone who treated emergencies for a living. I'm Dr. Ferraro, she said. Her English was lightly accented and completely precise. I'm going to examine the wound. This is going to hurt. I need you to tell me if you feel any pressure in your abdomen here or here. It's in my side, Avery said. I know where it is. I'm asking about other places. Pain can travel. She pressed with 2 fingers, and Avery bit down hard on the inside of her cheek. There, no. Good. She examined the entry and exit points with a small light, her expression professional and unrevealing. Then she sat back slightly and looked at Alejandro. Through and through, clean exit, no organ involvement. She needs proper suturing and antibiotics and observation, but she will be fine. A pause. You were fortunate. Tell her that, Alejandro said. Miss Avery, Dr. Ferraro said you were very fortunate. The bullet passed through without hitting anything critical. It will hurt for some time and you will need care, but you are not in danger. Avery had been holding herself very tightly since they brought her inside. She felt something in her chest loosen at those words, and she was furious with herself for how much she needed to hear them. She was not a person who cried in front of strangers. She had made sure of that for a long time. But her eyes stung, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling until the feeling passed. Okay, she said. Okay. Dr. Ferraro agreed without judgment. I'm going to clean and close the wound. You'll feel pressure and some discomfort. More than I'm feeling now. Different. She was already opening her bag. Avery turned her head to look at Alejandro, who was still in the chair. He hadn't moved. You can leave, she said. You don't have to sit there, I'm aware, but you're staying. Yes. Why? He considered the question. Not like someone stalling, but like someone deciding how much of the real answer to give. Because you were shot outside my restaurant and you saw the man who did it. That makes you relevant to a situation I need to understand. She stared at him. You're saying I'm a witness, among other things. What other things? He was quiet for a moment. Outside the closed door, she could hear the distant, muffled sounds of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, a burst of laughter from somewhere, the ordinary noise of a room full of people who had no idea what was happening 30 feet away from them. The order you picked up tonight, Alejandro said. The delivery. She had almost forgotten about the bag. She looked around and didn't see it. What about it? Where was it going? An address on North Dearborn. I have it in the app. She reached for her phone and the movement pulled it at her side and she stopped. In my pocket. Marco handed her the phone without comment. She pulled up the order. 1740 North Dearborn, ground floor. She looked up. Why bon? Alejandro didn't answer immediately. He looked at Marco, who moved to stand near the door, and then he looked back at Avery with an expression she couldn't fully read, something that was not quite regret and not quite guilt, but was somewhere in that territory. That address, he said carefully, does not exist. Avery blinked. What? 1740 North Dearborn is a parking structure. It has been a parking structure for 11 years. He leaned forward slightly in the chair, elbows on his knees. The order was placed through a burner account. The payment cleared, but the funds will be untraceable. The bag you were carrying was not food. The room was suddenly very quiet except for the small sounds of Dr. Ferraro working. What was in the bag? Avery said. I don't know yet. I need to find it. You set me up. Her voice came out flat and strange. Someone used your restaurant to send something to move something, and I was the one carrying it. I did not set you up, he said, and for the first time, there was something sharp in his voice, not defensiveness, something closer to contained fury directed somewhere other than her. I did not know about this order. Someone placed it without my knowledge, using my restaurant's listing on your delivery platform. Whoever did that knew I would not see it. Whoever did that wanted something moved without using their own people. He paused. And when you showed up to make that delivery, you walked into something that was never supposed to involve you. Someone shot at me, she said. Someone shot at me, he corrected quietly. You were between us. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence than the one before it. Avery looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching, which she noticed, and she filed it away with the other things she had been filing without meaning to. The practiced calm, the command over the men around him, the doctor on speed dial, the room at the back of the restaurant that was designed for exactly this kind of situation. Who are you? She said, not the way she had asked it before, confused and scared and bleeding. This time it was a real question. I told you my name. That's not what I'm asking. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, someone laughed again. That ordinary restaurant sound, and it seemed to come from a completely different world. I own 6 restaurants in Chicago, he said. I have business interests in real estate, in private security consulting, and in several other ventures that I keep separate from the public record. I have relationships with people in this city who are not the kind of people that appear in newspaper profiles. He met her eyes. And I have enemies, more than one. One of them was outside my restaurant tonight, and they are willing to put a bullet into a stranger to send me a message. Avery's mouth felt dry. Mafia, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging a word he had complicated feelings about. I prefer to think of it as organized business interests. That is the least reassuring thing anyone had ever said to me. You're taking this better than most people would. I'm in shock, she said. Ask me again in an hour. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the precursor to one, the shadow of something that might become warmth if it were ever allowed to. Dr. Ferraro will be finished soon. Then we need to talk about what you saw. I already told you what I saw. The tattoo, he said. Tell me more. She thought back. The pain made it harder to concentrate. But underneath the pain, her memory was surprisingly clear. The adrenaline had etched the moment in precise detail. It was on the inside of his left wrist. Black ink. Small. She paused. It was a chess piece. A rook, the castle one. Marco made a sound, short, involuntary. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Avery looked at him. You know what that is? Marco looked at Alejandro. Alejandro's jaw was set. I know what it is, he said. He stood up from the chair in a single controlled motion and moved to the corner of the room where his phone was sitting on the desk. He made a call in Italian, brief and sharp, and the tension in his voice was something Avery could feel even without understanding the words. Alejandro. She used his name without deciding to. It came out steady. Who has that tattoo? He ended the call and stood with his back to her for a moment. A man named Dorian Voss, he said finally. He turned around. He works for someone who has been trying to take over distribution networks in this city for 2 years. Someone who made a decision apparently that the time for patience was over. And the bag, Avery said, the delivery. What would have been in a bag going from your restaurant to a fake address on a night when someone with that tattoo was standing outside with a gun? He looked at her with something that might have been assessment and might have been respect. That, he said, is the right question. The room felt very still. Dr. Ferraro finished her work in silence and stood back. She should rest, she said to Alejandro. No movement for at least an hour. After that, if she's stable, she can be moved somewhere more appropriate. She'll need the antibiotics twice daily and the wound checked in 48 hours. She paused, and she should not be left alone tonight. Alejandro nodded. She won't be. Avery looked between them. I'm right here. You can direct those statements at me. Dr. Ferraro looked at her with the faintest softening around the eyes. My apologies, Miss Avery. You should rest. You are stable, but your body has been through significant trauma. If you feel any sudden increase in abdominal pain or any difficulty breathing, tell someone immediately. She began to pack her bag. Otherwise, you were very lucky tonight. People keep saying that, Avery said, because it is very true. Dr. Ferraro clicked the bag shut, exchanged another brief word with Alejandro, and left. The room was smaller without her. Marco had positioned himself near the door and was looking at his phone, scrolling through something with the focused attention of a man reading news he didn't like. Alejandro was standing in the center of the room, suit jacket open now, and Avery could see the slight tension across his shoulders, the kind that came from controlled anger, looking for a direction. You need to tell me what you're planning, she said. He looked at her. Because I'm not just going to lie here and let you manage me. I've been shot. I've been used as a mule for something I didn't consent to. I have a right to know what's happening. He was quiet for a moment. You're 26 years old and you work delivery shifts. Is that a reason to keep me in the dark? Or just something you felt like saying out loud? The corner of his mouth moved. Definite precursor to something this time. Fair enough. He came back to the chair and sat down again. Here is what I know. Voss doesn't act alone. He works for a man named Brescia who has been making moves in Chicago for 2 years and has been failing at them for 2 years because he can't get to me directly. Voss outside my restaurant tonight means Brescia has decided to escalate. And the delivery app. Whoever set up that order knew our operations. They knew which platform we use. They knew the service entrance schedule. They knew enough to get something out of this building on a night when I had a security gap. He paused. That means someone inside this operation gave them information. You have an informant, Avery said. I have a problem, he said. Yes. And I'm sitting in a room at the back of your restaurant in the middle of the night because I picked up a delivery at the wrong time. Yes. She leaned her head back against the couch cushion and stared at the ceiling. Her side ached with a deep, insistent throb that the local anesthetic was just barely managing. She was tired in a way that went past physical. She had $412 in her checking account. She had a bike locked to a pole outside. She had a double shift at the coffee shop in 9 hours. None of those things were going to be possible in the same way they had been this morning. The bag, she said, where is it? Marco was looking. She turned her head to look at Marco, who glanced up from his phone and said nothing. There's a tracking feature, she said, in the app for disputed deliveries. I can see the bag's last GPS ping. Marco looked at Alejandro. Alejandro nodded. Avery pulled up her phone with careful movements and navigated to the tracking feature. The bag had registered its last position at a location 2 blocks north, which meant it had either been dropped or picked up by someone else after she went down. 2 blocks north, she said, and turned the screen to show him. Alejandro looked at it and then looked at Marco with an expression that conveyed an instruction without needing words. I'll go, Marco said, already standing. Take Torres. Alejandro's voice dropped half a register. And Marco, call me from the location before you touch anything. Marco was gone. The room was very quiet. Avery lowered her phone. She looked at Alejandro, who was watching her with that same careful measuring look he had worn since the beginning, and she asked the question that had been sitting at the back of her throat since he told her the address didn't exist. You said whoever set up the order knew your operation, knew enough to get something out of your building. She paused. Does anyone else know that the bag is missing? Does anyone else know that I picked it up and got shot before I could deliver it? He was very still. Because if Brescia sent Voss to stop the delivery, she said slowly, and Voss missed, then Brescia doesn't know what happened to whatever is in that bag. And the informant inside your operation, whoever gave Brescia the information in the first place, they don't know either. They think the delivery was made, or they think it was intercepted. She held his gaze, which means there's a window, a small one, where neither side knows what happened. Alejandro looked at her for a long silent moment. I thought you worked in a coffee shop, he said. I also have a degree I couldn't afford to use, she said. Criminology, University of Illinois. I graduated 2 years ago and the job market had opinions. She watched him process that. Does that change things? He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the restaurant was still humming, still alive, still oblivious. Somewhere in the city, Marco was moving through dark streets toward a GPS coordinate and whatever was waiting there. It might, Alejandro said. Yes. His phone rang. He picked it up on the first ring and listened, and whatever Marco said on the other end made the controlled expression on his face change for the first time, not dramatically, not theatrically, but in a way that told Avery the contents of that bag were worse than he had been prepared for. He lowered the phone slowly. What is it? She said. He looked at her. And for the first time that night, Alejandro Vitali looked like a man who was calculating not just a move, but the cost of every possible move and coming up short. The bag, he said, contained documentation enough to bring down a federal investigation that has been buried for 3 years. He paused, and enough to implicate a Chicago detective named Crow in a money laundering operation that goes back further than that. Avery absorbed that. Crow, she repeated. Detective Russell Crow, Major Crimes Division. His voice was completely flat. He has been a person of interest to me for 18 months. Someone sent that documentation out of this restaurant tonight through your delivery app in a bag addressed to nowhere. He set the phone down, which means someone wanted those documents to disappear, and they were willing to kill a civilian to make sure they did. The pain in her side had not changed. The temperature in the room had not changed. But something fundamental had shifted in the shape of the night, in the weight of where she was sitting, and who she was sitting across from. She had delivered food for 3 years. She knew every shortcut on the north side. She knew which restaurants packed their bags right and which ones made drivers wait. She knew the names of the overnight security guards at 4 different buildings, and she knew which parking garages had attendants who left early. She had never been part of something like this. She was part of something like this now. If those documents get to the wrong people, she said, they disappear. Crow stays protected. Whatever he's been doing keeps going. Yes. And if they get to the right people, then a significant portion of what Brescia has built in this city over the past 4 years comes apart at the foundation. He looked at her steadily, including his arrangement with Crow. Avery pressed her hand lightly against her bandaged side, feeling the ache, feeling the realness of it. So what happens now, she said. Alejandro looked at her with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable, and she had the distinct sense that the answer he was about to give was not one he had planned on giving tonight to anyone, let alone a 26-year-old delivery driver bleeding on his office couch. Now, he said, we figure out who inside my operations sold us out, and we make sure those documents get to someone who cannot be bought. The restaurant hummed on around them, ordinary and oblivious. Avery looked at him. I saw the shooter's face, she said. I can identify the tattoo. I know the delivery route and I know what the app flagged. She kept her voice level. You need me. Alejandro didn't look away. Yes, he said, I do. Marco came back with the bag at 11:43, and the look on his face when he set it on the desk told Avery everything she needed to know before Alejandro even opened it. It wasn't the look of a man who had retrieved something. It was the look of a man who had confirmed something he had been hoping was wrong. The documents were there, 41 pages, some printed, some handwritten, all of them contained in a sealed envelope that had been packed inside an insulated food bag, alongside 2 empty containers that had been arranged to look like a legitimate restaurant order. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had thought through the cover, the timing, the route. Someone who knew exactly how a delivery pickup worked and exactly how little attention anyone paid to the person carrying the bag. 41 pages, Marco said. He didn't touch them. He stood back from the desk with his arms crossed and let Alejandro read. Bank transfers, wire routing numbers, 3 shell corporations registered in Delaware, and a name that appears on every 3rd page. Crow, Alejandro said without looking up. Crow, Marco confirmed. Avery was sitting upright on the couch now, the blanket Dr. Ferraro had instructed Marco to find, still across her lap, her hands wrapped around a cup of water she hadn't finished. She watched Alejandro's face as he read, and she thought about the way people looked when they got information that confirmed their worst suspicions versus information that genuinely surprised them. This was the former. His expression was not shock. It was something colder and more deliberate. The expression of a man who had been waiting a long time to be proven right about something he wished he had been wrong about. Who else has seen these, he said. Just us, Marco said. Torres secured the location. No prints on the bag, no witnesses to the pickup. The app will have a record that the delivery was accepted and never completed, Avery said from the couch. Both men looked at her. My account. When a delivery times out without a completion, scan the platform flags it automatically. If anyone checks my account history tonight, they'll see an incomplete order logged from this address. Alejandro looked at Marco. She's right, Marco said. Can it be removed? Alejandro asked her. Not from my end. Platform support can do it, but they require a reason, and it leaves a log entry either way. She paused. But there's a grace period before it auto-escalates. 6 hours from the order timestamp. After that, it goes to the dispute queue. How long do we have? She looked at her phone. 4 hours and 20 minutes. The room was quiet for 2 seconds. Alejandro set the documents down and looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the look he got when she said something that recalibrated his understanding of the situation. She had seen it 3 times now. She was keeping count without meaning to. You know this platform well, he said. I've disputed enough orders to know how the system works. She kept her voice dry. Cold food, wrong address, missing items. 4 years of delivery work teaches you the paperwork. Marco made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh before he thought better of it. Alejandro picked up his phone. I need to make a call. Marco, stay with her. He moved toward the door and then stopped without turning around. Avery, The man who placed this order through your platform, if he knew the grace period, he would know that if the delivery was interrupted, he had a window before anyone official started asking questions. 6 hours is enough time to disappear, she said, or to finish what they started. He turned then just enough to look at her over his shoulder. Yes, he said, it is. And then he was through the door. Marco pulled up a chair and sat down with the particular ease of a man who was accustomed to waiting in small rooms. He set his phone face down on his knee and looked at Avery with a directness that was not hostile, but was not comfortable either. He was assessing her the same way Alejandro had been assessing her, and she was tired of being assessed by men who hadn't bothered to ask her real name until 40 minutes after she was bleeding on their pavement. You worked for him long, she asked. Long enough, Marco said. What does that mean? It means I don't count in years. He looked at her steadily. How are you feeling? Like I got shot. Fair. He was quiet for a moment. You're handling this better than you think you are. I'm not handling it at all. I'm sitting on a couch because I can't stand up without my side screaming at me. That's not handling it. That's just being vertical. Most people in your situation would be hysterical by now. Most people in my situation would have called 911 the second they had a signal, she said. I didn't. I should probably think about why I didn't. Marco said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The truth was, she had thought about it. Twice. Once when she first understood who Alejandro Vitali was, and once when Marco left to retrieve the bag. Both times she had looked at her phone and run the calculation, and both times the calculation had come back complicated. The bullet had not been random. The order had not been real. If she called the police and reported a shooting outside Vitali on North Wabash, she would be a witness, and witnesses in situations she was beginning to understand had very short grace periods of their own. And there was Detective Crow, whose name was on 41 pages of documentation, and whose name Alejandro had said with the particular flatness of a man who knew he had no allies in that particular precinct. She wasn't naive. She had grown up in Chicago. She knew what it meant when a street name was on a wire transfer and a detective's name was next to it. The informant, she said. The one who set up the order. Someone inside Alejandro's organization. Marco's jaw tightened just slightly. He knows it's someone close, she said. On the kitchen staff or the front of house. Someone who knew the security schedule. Someone who knew the delivery platform setup. Marco looked at her for a long moment. You're going to hurt yourself thinking that hard. I have 4 hours and 20 minutes in and I can't walk fast. Thinking is what I've got. She held his gaze. How many people knew about the operation tonight? The real one, not the restaurant. That's not a conversation you and I are having, and he said, firm but not unkind. Then tell me about Valentina. The change was immediate and small, and she almost missed it. A slight adjustment in how he was sitting, a shift behind the eyes. Where did you hear that name? I didn't, I'm guessing. She watched him. There were 3 sets of footsteps when they came out to the street. 2 men in a lighter step. Someone stayed inside. Whoever it was didn't come into this room when you brought me in, which means Alejandro made a decision to keep us separated. She paused. Either she's someone he trusts completely or someone he doesn't trust at all. Marco stood up. He walked to the corner of the room and stood with his back partially to her, which was not the behavior of someone who had nothing to say. Marco, you should sleep, he said. Tell me I'm wrong, and I will. He turned around. You're not wrong, he said, and that's all I'm saying. The door opened and Alejandro came back in, and the air in the room changed in the way it changed whenever he walked into it, not from fear she was realizing, but from something more like pressure. The weight of a person who carried serious things and had learned to carry them without showing the strain. He looked at Marco first, then at Avery. Voss is in the wind. Torres couldn't locate him at the secondary address. Marco said a word in Italian under his breath. There's more, Alejandro said. He set his phone on the desk and stood with both hands flat on the surface looking at the documents. My contact in the federal building says Crow filed a report 2 hours ago. A shooting on North Wabash. Unidentified victim, unknown motive. He paused. He got to it before the uniforms. The scene has been processed by his people. Avery's stomach went cold. He already knows. He knows there was a shooting. He doesn't know about the bag. Alejandro looked at her. Yet. But if he finds out the delivery was flagged in the app, then he'll know the bag wasn't delivered and he'll start working backward from there. He straightened up, which is why we have a shorter window than 4 hours. How short, Marco said. Crow will pull the app records the moment someone connects the shooting to an unresolved delivery order. That could happen anytime his people run the standard checks. He looked at Avery. Can you access your account history and alter the completion status? No, she said, but I can mark it as a restaurant error. If I flag the order as a bad pickup before the dispute queue gets it, it looks like the restaurant canceled, not like the delivery was abandoned. It kills the flag. She paused, but it creates a different log entry, one that shows I was active on the app after the shooting. Meaning you would have had to be conscious, Alejandro said, immobile, and somewhere near a cell tower that isn't this block. He looked at her for a long beat. Can you do it from here? She looked at her phone. The app was still open. The order was still pending. She thought about what it meant to touch this, to actively alter a record, however minor, in whatever was building around her. She thought about her $412. She thought about the coffee shop shift she was going to miss. She thought about Crow processing a crime scene on North Wabash with gloves on and a practiced look of official concern. She flagged the order as a restaurant cancellation. Confirmation appeared in 3 seconds. Done, she said. Alejandro exhaled through his nose. Not relief exactly, more like a clock stopping. Good, he said. Now we have time to make a decision. She looked at him. What decision? What to do with you? She held his gaze. I told you I'm not going anywhere. That is not what I meant. He came back to the chair. He kept returning to that chair. She noticed the same distance, each time close enough for a real conversation, far enough to let her breathe. I meant what to do about your situation. You need somewhere to stay tonight that isn't here. This location is known. I have an apartment, she said, which is in your name and address on your delivery account, he said, which Crow now has access to. She hadn't thought of that. She had thought she was being smart, and she had missed that entirely, and the realization sat poorly. My sister, she said after a moment. Where? Wicker Park. She doesn't know anything about any of this. Can you trust her to keep it that way? She's a kindergarten teacher. She does not move in circles where this information is useful to anyone dangerous. She paused. She also won't ask me too many questions if I show up and tell her I need a night on her couch. Marco said something quiet to Alejandro. Alejandro nodded slowly. Marco will take you, he said. Someone will be outside the building tonight. I don't need... This is not a negotiation, he said, not unkindly. Voss is loose in this city with knowledge that you identified him. That makes you a liability to Brescia. Until I understand the full scope of what tonight was, you are not safe alone. She wanted to argue with that. She had been taking care of herself in this city for 4 years. She knew how to be cautious and self-reliant, and she did not need a man she had met 90 minutes ago telling her she required a babysitter. But the pain in her side said something different, and the 41 pages on the desk said something different, and the image of Crow in latex gloves touching the pavement where she had been bleeding said something that she could not find a counter-argument for. Fine, she said. There's something else. He leaned forward. In the morning, I need to know everything you remember about the order. Not just the address, the account name that placed it, the timestamp, any details in the order notes, anything that seemed unusual about the pickup, even before the shooting. I remember everything, she said. Everything. I have a good memory. It's one of the reasons I was halfway through a criminology degree before the money ran out. She said it without bitterness, which was the way she had trained herself to say it. I can give you a full account of the app interaction from the moment I accepted the order. He was quiet for a moment. In the quiet, she heard his phone buzz twice. He looked at it, and something shifted in his expression, just slightly, just enough. What? She said. Valentina, he said. He looked at Marco. She's outside. Marco stood up straight. You want me to... No, his voice was very even. Send her in. Avery watched the door. She had constructed a picture of Valentina from Marco's reaction and Alejandro's careful management of where she was and wasn't in the building, and that picture was someone significant. What she was not prepared for was someone significant who looked like this tall, early 40s, dark hair swept back, wearing a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt with the kind of precise, unhurried elegance that came from understanding exactly who you were. She walked into the room and her eyes moved first to the documents on the desk, then to Avery, and her expression was not surprised. "You already knew," Avery said. It wasn't a question. Valentina looked at her with calm, dark eyes. "I knew there was a shooting. I didn't know about the documents until 20 minutes ago." She looked at Alejandro. "We have a problem." "More than one," he said. "One specific problem." Valentina moved to the desk and looked at the documents without touching them. The handwriting on the transfer orders. "Third page." Alejandro turned to the third page. Avery watched his face. There it was. Not shock, not anger. Something worse than both, the particular devastation of recognition. "You know whose handwriting that is?" Avery said quietly. He was still for a long moment. Then he closed the documents and set them face down on the desk and turned away. And for the first time since she had met him 90 minutes ago, Alejandro Vitali looked like a man who needed a moment he wasn't going to take. "His name is Gianni," Valentina said. She was watching Alejandro's back with an expression of exhausted sorrow. "He's been with us for 9 years. Marco sat down heavily. "Gianni. He's the one who set up the delivery order," Valentina said. "He had that access to the platform account, and he knew the schedule, and he knew—" She stopped. "He knew everything." The room was very quiet. Avery thought about 9 years. 9 years of proximity, of access, of trust, built carefully and then spent all at once. She thought about what it felt like to discover that the person who handed you the information that got someone shot in the street was someone who ate at the same table, who knew your rotes, who used your name without ceremony because there had been years of permission. "Where is he now?" Marco said. Valentina looked at Alejandro's back. "That's the problem. He hasn't been to his apartment since 7 this evening. His phone is off." She paused. "He knew we would find out. He left before we did." Alejandro turned around. His face was composed again. Whatever had been there for those few seconds was gone, and in its place was the focused, pressurized calm that Avery was beginning to understand was not the absence of emotion, but the controlled deployment of it. "Brescia has him," he said. "Or he went to Brescia willingly," Marco said. "Does it matter?" Alejandro looked at the documents. "He has everything. 9 years of what he knows, and now he's on the other side of the table." He looked at Valentina. "Did he take anything from the office?" "The secondary drive from the server room, the one with the operational contacts." She said it carefully, like each word was weight she was setting down. "If Brescia has that drive and those documents together, then Crow has everything he needs to close every investigation that's been pointed at Brescia's operation for the last 2 years," Avery said. They all looked at her. She looked back steadily. "The documents implicate Crow. Crow protects Brescia. If Brescia now has the documents and the drive, he doesn't need to suppress them anymore. He can weaponize them, use them as leverage over Crow to make sure nothing ever comes to trial." She paused. "Mutual destruction as insurance. Neither one can turn on the other because each one holds the evidence that ends the other." The silence in the room lasted 4 full seconds. Valentina looked at Alejandro. "Who is she?" "A delivery driver," he said, and something in his voice when he said it was no longer dismissive or even ironic. It was almost something else entirely. "She's right," Marco said. "That's what the play is. Brescia doesn't want to destroy the documents. He wants to own them." Alejandro looked at Avery, long and careful and with the full weight of a decision forming behind his eyes. "The order account name," he said. "You said you remember everything." "Yes." "Tell me." "The display name was Ferretti R. The order notes said no substitutions and included a pickup code. The code was 6 digits, 472913. She watched his expression. "You know that number?" "It's a vault code," Valentina said softly. "An old one, from a location we decommissioned 14 months ago." She looked at Alejandro. Johnny would have known it. "He used a number that would mean nothing to the delivery platform and everything to us," Alejandro said. "He was sending a message." "Or a warning," Avery said. Alejandro looked at her sharply. "Johnny set up the delivery," she said slowly, working through it. He got the documents into a bag and sent them out through my account. But if he was working for Brescia, why use a vault code that only your people would recognize? Why signal you at all? She paused. What if he didn't go to Brescia willingly? What if someone inside Brescia's operation got to him first, used him to set this up, and then disappeared him before he could warn you? Marco stood up again. Valentina was very still. Alejandro was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before on his face, something that was not quite hope and not quite dread, but was threaded through with both. If Gianni was coerced, Marco said carefully, then he might still be alive. And if he's alive, Valentina said, he knows who gave the order. He knows the name above Brescia, Alejandro said quietly. And then he stopped, because the full weight of that sentence landed in the room and nobody moved for a moment. Avery felt it, the shape of what she had just walked into the center of. Not a territory dispute, not a rival moving in on distribution. Something larger. Something that went up past Brescia to a name they hadn't said yet, a name that apparently even Alejandro hadn't been sure existed until this moment. Her side hurt. The clock on her phone said 12:18 in the morning. She had a shift in less than 9 hours that she was not going to make. Gianni used the vault code, she said. He knew you would read this order. He knew the code would get your attention. He was trying to get a message to me, Alejandro said, in the only way he could. She held his gaze. Which means the message is the documents. The documents are what he needed you to have. Alejandro looked at the 41 pages on the desk. He knew about Crow, Valentina said. He's known for months. He brought it to me twice. I told him we needed more proof before we moved. And now we have the proof, Marco said, in his handwriting. In his handwriting, Alejandro repeated. His voice was very quiet. Which means whoever sent those documents out of this building made sure that if we found them, the first name we read was his. He looked at Valentina. This was not just about moving the documents. This was about making sure I looked at Johnny and stopped looking at everyone else. The realization settled over the room like something cold. The informant, Avery said slowly. It's not Gianni. No, Alejandro said. Gianni is the distraction. He looked at Marco. Someone else set this up. Someone who has been inside this operation long enough to know the vault code, know the delivery schedule, and know that if Johnny's name appeared on those documents, I would spend the next 12 hours looking in the wrong direction. Marco's face had gone very still. How many people knew the vault code? Alejandro looked at him for a long, careful moment. Marco looked back. 4, Alejandro said, including the 3 people in this room. Nobody spoke. Avery looked at Valentina. Valentina looked at Alejandro. Alejandro looked at the door, and then back at the people he trusted most in the world, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had just realized the ground under his feet was not solid. Nobody moved for a long moment. The word 4 sat in the room like something with mass and weight pressing down on everything underneath it. 4 people who knew the vault code. Alejandro, Marco, Valentina, and Gianni, who was missing, whose handwriting was on documents designed to make him look guilty, whose name was the first thing you read and the last thing you were supposed to question. Avery watched Alejandro's face. She had gotten good at reading it in the past 2 hours better than she should have been able to, given how little of it he showed. What she saw now was not accusation. It was worse than accusation. It was the look of a man running every memory he had through a new filter, checking each one against a reality he was only now fully understanding and not liking what the new version showed him. Marco broke the silence first. Say it. I'm not saying anything, Alejandro said. You're thinking it. Say it. Alejandro looked at him. 4 people knew the code. 1 of them is missing and being set up. 3 of us are standing in this room. He paused. The math doesn't require me to say anything. Then let me say it. Marco's voice was flat and steady. I didn't touch the order. I didn't touch the platform account. I have been in this building since 6 this evening, and Torres can account for every hour of it. He held Alejandro's gaze without blinking. I have been with you for 11 years. If you need to look at me right now, look. But look fast, because we don't have time for you to be wrong about this. The silence between them was the silence of 2 men who had been through enough together that they could have this conversation without it destroying anything but only barely. Alejandro looked at Valentina. She met his eyes and something passed between them that Avery could not fully read, something old and complicated and not entirely resolved. I was at a dinner in the Gold Coast until 9:45, Valentina said. 8 witnesses, including a sitting alderman. I came straight here when you called. She paused. And I have been trying to get you to move on Crow for 6 months, Alejandro. If I wanted to bury those documents, I would not have spent 6 months asking you to use them. The room was very still. Avery cleared her throat. The fourth person who knew the code, she said carefully. They all looked at her. You said 4 people. Johnny is 1. The 3 of you are 3, but I'm counting on both hands and I want to make sure I understand, was there ever a time when a 5th person had access to the code, even temporarily? Someone who helped set up the vault? Someone who was there when it was established? Someone who was trusted enough at the time that you didn't document the access? Alejandro went very still. Marco turned his head slowly to look at him. Alejandro, Valentina said quietly. His name is Enzo, Alejandro said. He said it like the name cost him something. Enzo Marchetti, he was with us when the vault was created. He left the operation 14 months ago, when we decommissioned the location. Left voluntarily, Marco said, not a question, a reminder. He said he was done. He wanted out. He got out. I gave him a clean exit because he had earned it. Alejandro's jaw was set. I have not spoken to him since. But he knew the code, Avery said. He knew the code. And 14 months ago is exactly when the vault was decommissioned, she said. Right around the same time Brescia started making his moves in Chicago. The sequence of it landed in the room without anyone needing to say it out loud. Enzo Marchetti exits cleanly. 2 months later, Brescia begins a 2-year campaign to dismantle everything Alejandro has built. Not randomly, not blindly, with precise knowledge of routes, schedules, operational contacts, and a vault code that should have been dead for over a year. He didn't leave, Marco said. He switched sides. We don't know that, Alejandro said, but his voice had lost the certainty that usually backed his sentences. We know enough, Marco said. We know the code is active. We know Gianni is missing, and someone with inside knowledge set him up. We know Brescia has been 2 steps ahead of us since the month Enzo walked out that door. He looked at Alejandro steadily. What else do you need? Alejandro turned away from both of them and looked at the documents on the desk. His hands were flat on the surface again, the same posture he had used earlier, and Avery recognized it now as a physical habit, the way he grounded himself when the ground was moving. She had her own version of it. She pressed her thumb into her palm. Everyone had something. If Enzo is working for Brescia, he said more to himself than to the room, then Brescia knows exactly what those documents contain. He sent Voss to intercept the delivery, not to retrieve them, but to confirm they left this building, to confirm Johnny was moving them. To confirm Johnny was the leak, Valentina said, so that if the documents ever surfaced, they would already be discredited, a traitor's evidence. But Gianni used the vault code in the order, Avery said. She was thinking out loud now, the way she used to think through case studies at the university, building the structure piece by piece. He knew the documents were going out. He knew he was being framed. He put the code in the order notes as a signal, the only signal he could send without alerting whoever was watching him. She paused, which means Johnny is not with Brescia. Johnny is being held by Brescia. Alejandro turned around. He's alive, she said, and he knows where Enzo is. And he knows what Brescia's next move is, and he put the only breadcrumb he could reach into a delivery order because he knew it would get back to you. She held Alejandro's gaze. He trusted you to read it. The room was quiet. Then Alejandro said, Marco, and his voice was different as stripped down, no performance in it at all. Find out where Brescia keeps people when he wants them quiet. Marco was already on his phone. Valentina moved to the desk and picked up the documents. She handled them carefully, turning to the 3rd page, looking at Johnny's handwriting with an expression that contained 9 years of small, accumulated trust. He annotated the transfer amounts, she said softly. Look at this. He didn't just write the numbers, he added initials in the margin. Small. You'd miss them if you weren't reading closely. She held the page up for Alejandro. He looked for a long moment. E.M., he said. Enzo Marchetti, Valentina confirmed. On every transfer that runs above 200,000, he was documenting Enzo's cuts. She lowered the page. He knew about Enzo for a long time. Why didn't he come to me? Alejandro said. Because maybe he couldn't prove it, Avery said. Or because he tried once and didn't get heard. Or because he was already being watched and couldn't move without giving himself away. She paused. Or because he was scared. People are allowed to be scared. Alejandro looked at her for a moment. Something crossed his face that she couldn't name. She's right, Valentina said quietly. He brought me the Crow information twice, and I told him to wait. If he came to you with Enzo and you said the same thing, she stopped. He would have had to find another way. The weight of that sat on Alejandro in a way that was visible even through the composure. He absorbed it, and he did not argue with it, and he did not make excuses, and Avery thought that whatever else he was not a man who hid from the things he had gotten wrong. Marco lowered his phone. Torres has a location, a warehouse on the south end of the port registered to a logistics company that has Brescia's fingerprints on the incorporation documents if you know where to look. It's been active for 4 months. He paused. There are 2 vehicles registered to Brescia's people parked within a block of it as of an hour ago. How current is that information, Alejandro said. Current enough, Marco looked at him. We can move on it tonight. Not tonight, Valentina said immediately. Not with Voss in the wind and no understanding of the full security setup. We go in blind and we lose Gianni for certain. We wait until morning and Brescia moves him, Marco said. We wait 2 hours, Alejandro said. Both of them stopped. We use the time to get a clear picture of the location and we move before dawn when the shift changes. It's the only window where the numbers work. He looked at Marco. Get Torres on a surveillance now. I want eyes on every entry and exit. And find out who Brescia uses for private security contracts. I want to know what we're walking into before we're inside it. Marco nodded once and was out the door. Alejandro looked at Avery. She had been sitting upright through all of it, the blanket still across her lap, her phone in her hand running on adrenaline and the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through 4 years of doing everything the hard way. The pain in her side was a steady, throbbing companion now, something she had negotiated with rather than defeated. She was tired in the deep way that went past physical, and she knew she looked it. You should go to your sister's, he said. You should want me here, she said. He waited. I accepted the order. My account is attached to it. If anyone looks at the delivery chain, I am the last legitimate touch point before those documents disappeared. I'm already in this. She held his gaze. And I know what Voss looks like. I can identify the tattoo. I have a photographic memory for what was in those order notes and what the pickup interaction looked like. You need that. What I need, he said carefully, is for you to be somewhere safe. Well, the safest place I can be is where the people who know what happened are. The most dangerous place I can be is somewhere alone where nobody knows where I am. She paused. I learned that from a criminology textbook, but it's still true. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she could not quite catch before it was gone. You're injured, he said. I'm functional, she said. Ask Dr. Ferraro. She cleared me to move. She cleared you to move to somewhere with a couch and antibiotics. Then get me a couch with antibiotics and keep me where you can use me. She watched him. Alejandro, I'm not asking you to take me into the field. I'm asking you not to park me somewhere I can't see what's happening. I won't survive the not knowing. That is an honest statement about my psychology, and you should factor it in. He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, Valentina. Valentina looked at him. Is the apartment on Erie still clear? As of this morning. Take her there, stay with her. He looked back at Avery. It's 2 blocks from here. I will be there within 3 hours with whatever we find at the warehouse location. You will be informed of everything relevant. He paused. That's the offer. She waited. 2 blocks. 3 hours, informed of everything relevant. It wasn't ideal. It was better than Wicker Park and a kindergarten teacher who would panic and ask too many questions. Fine, she said. Valentina was already reaching for her jacket. Avery stood up from the couch, slowly testing her legs, testing her side. The ache flared and then settled into something manageable. She took 2 steps and the world stayed level. She took a breath and it hurt the way it was supposed to hurt, and not worse. Alejandro was watching her. I'm fine, she said before he could say anything. I know, he said. And then unexpectedly, you're very good at this. She looked at him. At staying level, he said. At reading a situation. At not falling apart when falling apart would be easier. He said it without sentiment, the way he said most things, like an observation rather than a compliment. She wasn't sure what to do with it. She said, "I've had practice." He nodded once as if that explained something he had been wondering about. Then his phone rang, and he answered it, and the brief human moment closed, and he was back to being the man who owned a restaurant and carried dangerous things quietly. Valentina touched Avery's elbow gently. "Come," she said. "I'll explain the elevator situation." The apartment on Erie was nothing like what Avery expected, which was fair since she had stopped trying to have accurate expectations about anything in Alejandro Vitali's orbit. It was clean and quiet and ordinary in a way that felt deliberate, the kind of ordinary that was carefully constructed to draw no attention from anyone passing through. Functional furniture covered windows, a kitchen stocked with things that lasted. A safe house, she realized. Not for luxury, for exactly this kind of night. She sat at the kitchen table while Valentina made coffee, and she thought about Johnny in a warehouse on the south end of the port, and about a man named Enzo Marchetti who had walked out of the trusted position and into a different kind of loyalty, and about the 41 pages of documentation that were now sitting in a room 2 blocks away, changing the shape of everything around them. Valentina set a coffee cup in front of her and sat down across the table, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "How long have you known Alejandro?" Avery asked. Valentina considered the question the way she considered most things, with a deliberateness that suggested she didn't give information carelessly. 15 years, she said. "And you've seen nights like this before?" "Not exactly like this." Valentina wrapped both hands around her own cup, "but similar shapes." She paused. "He doesn't trust easily. I want you to understand that. What happened tonight, the way he let you into that room, the way he kept you in the conversation, that is not how he operates with people he's just met." Avery looked at her. "Is that a warning?" "It's context," Valentina said. "He's doing something he doesn't usually do. I think he knows that." Avery looked at her coffee. The steam rose slowly in the quiet air of the kitchen. She thought about the way he had sat in that chair across from her with a distance that was both careful and deliberate, and the way he had looked at her when she said she could identify Voss in the small controlled thing that had shifted in his face when she told him she had a criminology degree she couldn't afford to use. "He feels responsible," she said. "He is responsible," Valentina said without cruelty. "Someone used his restaurant to move those documents, and someone sent a gunman to that sidewalk, and you were between all of it because of a $42 delivery order." She paused. "He knows that." "I don't blame him." "I know you don't." Valentina looked at her steadily. "He does." Avery's phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She looked at Valentina, who nodded. She answered. "Avery." Alejandro's voice on the phone was lower than in person, stripped of the room acoustics. "Torres has eyes on the warehouse. There are 4 people on the exterior. 1 vehicle at the rear that was not there an hour ago." "Gianni," she said. "Possibly." A pause. "There's something else. Torres ran the logistics company that holds the warehouse registration. One of the directors is a name I want you to hear." She waited. "Russell Crowe." His voice was absolutely flat. "He is a listed director of the shell company. He has been since the company was incorporated 19 months ago." Avery set her cup down very carefully. "He's not just protecting Brescia." "No, he's a partner." "Yes." A pause. "Which changes the nature of those documents considerably. They don't just implicate him in money laundering. They document a business arrangement between an active Chicago detective and a man running organized operations through this city. That is not a suppression situation. That is a federal matter." "Who do you trust at the federal level?" she said. A long pause, longer than she expected. "There is a name," he said finally. "An agent I have dealt with once before on terms that were complicated but honest. Her name is Carver. She's out of the Chicago field office." "Do you know if she's clean?" "I know she spent 18 months trying to build a case against Brescia through legitimate channels and got shut down every time. I know the shutdowns happened at the local level." He paused. "I know she was looking for evidence and couldn't get it." Avery looked at Valentina across the kitchen table. Valentina was watching her with her hands still around the coffee cup and her expression very controlled. "You have the evidence," Avery said into the phone. "I have 41 pages and a missing man who annotated them in the margins." His voice was quiet. And I have a witness who can place a known associate of Brescia's operation at the scene of a shooting on North Wabash. A pause. If you're willing. She absorbed that, the full weight of what it meant to say yes to it, to walk into a federal conversation as a witness, to attach her name and her account and her testimony to documents that implicated a Chicago detective with a gun in a city full of people who owed him favors. She thought about Crow on that sidewalk in his gloves, in his careful official expression, while she was bleeding 2 hours before he filed his report. I'm willing, she said. She heard something through the phone, not words. The small sound of a man releasing a breath he had been holding. I'll call Carver after we have Johnny, he said. Stay with Valentina. Do not open the door for anyone other than Marco or me. Understood. Avery. A pause. Thank you. The line went quiet. She set the phone down on the table. The kitchen was still. Outside somewhere in the city, Alejandro was moving toward a warehouse on the south end of the port, and Marco was on a phone that never stopped, and somewhere inside that warehouse, a man named Johnny had put a 6-digit code in a delivery order and waited for someone to read it right. Valentina was watching her. He's going to get Johnny out, she said. Not a question, a statement of faith that had 15 years behind it. I know, Avery said. She believed it. She wasn't sure when she had started believing things about Alejandro Vitali, but somewhere between the sidewalk and the kitchen table it had happened, and she filed that away with everything else she had been filing without meaning to. She picked up her coffee. She drank it slowly. She watched the covered windows, and she thought about federal agents and missing men and a tattoo on her wrist, and she thought about $412 in a checking account and a bike still chained to a pole on North Wabash and a delivery app account that now had a canceled order and a very complicated history. Then Valentina's phone lit up. She looked at it, and her expression changed in a way that made Avery's stomach tighten before she said a single word. Torres lost visual on the rear vehicle, Valentina said. It moved 12 minutes ago. Avery looked at her. Toward here, Valentina said. They stared at each other across the kitchen table. They know about this apartment, Avery said. Nobody knows about this apartment, Valentina said, but her voice had a fracture in it. The fracture of a person who was saying something they had believed until 5 seconds ago. Enzo knew the vault code, Avery said. Her voice was steady. What else did Enzo know? Valentina was already on her feet, already moving toward the front of the apartment, already pulling out the phone to call Alejandro, and her face in the kitchen light had the look of a woman who was running a terrible calculation and arriving at a number she did not want to read out loud. Enzo, she said into the phone the moment it connected, knew everything. Alejandro picked up before the second ring. Valentina had 3 words out and he cut across them. Get out of the apartment. Now. Use the stairs, not the elevator. Go to the parking structure on Erie Level 2, northwest corner. I have someone there, Chamimar, in 4 minutes. Valentina was already moving. She pulled Avery up from the chair by the arm. Not rough, but with zero margin for hesitation, and Avery was on her feet and moving before the pain in her side had time to register a formal complaint. Her jacket was on the couch. She grabbed it without stopping. Her phone went into her pocket. Her shoes were already on because she had never fully relaxed enough to take them off, which she was now grateful for in a way she hadn't anticipated when she made that decision. How far is the parking structure? She said. Half a block. Valentina was at the door listening with her hand flat against it. The stairs go down to a side exit. We don't go through the lobby. Does Enzo know the side exit? A beat. The beat itself was the answer. We move fast and we don't stop, Valentina said. If anyone speaks to you, you don't answer. Understood. Valentina opened the door and they went. The stairwell was lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly on the descent, and the sound of their footsteps was something Avery worked to control, not running, because running was noise and noise was information, but moving at the edge of running, that particular speed, where control and urgency were exactly balanced. Her side burned with each stair. She breathed through it the way Dr. Ferraro had instructed, shallow and steady, and she counted the flights in her head because counting was better than thinking about what was behind the vehicle that had moved toward this address 12 minutes ago. 2 flights. 3. Valentina pushed open the door at the bottom and the cold air of the side street hit them both. Neither of them spoke. They moved. The parking structure was half a block and it felt like a mile in the 2 in the morning darkness, with a fresh gunshot wound and the particular electric awareness of being a person who knows they are being looked for. Avery kept her head down and her pace even, and she thought about the 4 years she had spent moving through this city at night on a bike and on foot, and how she had always known the exits and the side streets and the places where the cameras weren't, and she thought that was its own kind of training for a moment exactly like this one. They got to the parking structure. Level 2 northwest corner. A dark SUV was idling with its lights off. The driver's window came down and a face she didn't recognize looked at Valentina and said one word in Italian. Valentina said one word back. The back door opened. They were inside and moving before Avery had fully processed sitting down. Torres, Valentina said to the driver. How long? 8 minutes out from the warehouse, Torres said. He was maybe 35 broad across the shoulders with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been in tense situations enough times that they no longer made him tense. Alejandro's already there. Marco went in 3 minutes ago. Avery's breath caught. They went in without surveillance confirmation. They went in when the vehicle moved, Torres said. The timeline changed. Valentina looked at Avery with an expression that was very controlled and very honest at the same time. When Brescia's people moved toward the apartment, it meant one of two things. Either they knew where you were and were coming for you, or they had already finished with Gianni and were covering the remaining loose ends. Avery absorbed that. She thought about what covering a loose end looked like when the loose end had been annotating federal documents in a warehouse on the South Port. Alejandro went in to make sure they hadn't already. Yes, Valentina said. The SUV moved through streets that were quiet in the way Chicago was quiet after 2 in the morning. Not silent, not safe, but running on a lower frequency than the hours before. Avery looked out the window and thought about a man she had never met who had put a 6-digit code in a food delivery order and trusted that it would reach the right person in time. Valentina, she said. Yes. If Enzo knew about this apartment, what else could he have given Brescia in the last 14 months? What's the worst-case scope of it? Valentina was quiet for 3 seconds. Operational safe houses, contact names in 3 different cities, the identity of 2 people who work for us inside legitimate institutions. She paused. And the names of 2 federal contacts that Alejandro has cultivated over 7 years. Including Carver, Avery said. Possibly. If Brescia knows about Carver, he'll move to discredit her or compromise her before Alejandro can make contact. Yes. Avery looked at her phone and she had Alejandro's number from when he called Erie. She pulled it up. Valentina saw what she was doing and didn't stop her. She typed, if Enzo knew your federal contacts, Carver may already be compromised or flagged. Don't call her from a number Brescia has associated with you. She sent it and watched the screen. 3 seconds. Then ahead of you, already arranged. Focus on staying safe. She showed the screen to Valentina, who read it and allowed herself a small exhale. Torres took a turn that pressed them both sideways and said, 2 minutes. The warehouse district on the South Port was the kind of place that was built to look like nothing was happening, which was why a great deal had been happening there for years. Legitimate freight, illegitimate arrangements. The kind of businesses that ran in the overlap between those 2 categories and paid the right people to keep the overlap invisible. Torres pulled up on the north side of the block and cut the engine, and for a moment the 3 of them sat in the dark listening. Avery could hear her own heartbeat. She was not ashamed of that. Torres's radio crackled. A voice in Italian, quick and clipped. Torres answered. He looked at Valentina. Marco has Johnny. He's alive. They're coming out the south exit. Valentina's eyes closed for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were bright and steady, and she pressed her lips together once, which was the most emotion Avery had seen from her. And the people inside, 3 of Brescia's security, subdued. Torres paused, listening to more radio traffic. Alejandro is requesting a change of location. He says the warehouse is a secondary site. Brescia's primary location is somewhere else, and Johnny has the address. Gianni talked, Avery said. Johnny apparently didn't need much encouragement, Torres said. His tone said volumes about the condition Johnny had been found in. Alejandro is calling it in 2 minutes. The call came in 90 seconds. Alejandro's voice was completely level, which told Avery more about the controlled intensity of the last hour than any description of it would have. Gianni is with us, he said. He needs medical attention, but he's coherent and he's talking. The address Brescia uses as his primary operations base is a private residence in Kenilworth, registered to a woman named Dana Brescia, his sister. It's clean on paper. A pause. And Gianni says Enzo is there. Then that's where the drive is, Avery said. Yes. His voice shifted just slightly. There's something else. Gianni told me who above Brescia has been directing this operation. The name Enzo passed up the chain when he switched sides. She waited. State Senator Paul Draymond, he said. The name hit the SUV like something physical. Valentina made a sound. Torres said a word under his breath. Avery had heard of Draymond. Everyone in Chicago had heard of Draymond. 16 years in the state senate, an office with a view, a reputation for being the kind of politician who was just clean enough to keep the profile and just dirty enough to be useful to people who needed things arranged. His name had been in the background of 4 separate corruption investigations over the years, each one of which had quietly dissolved before reaching his office. Crow is Draymond's man, she said. Not a question. Has been for 9 years, Alejandro said. Johnny has dates meeting records in the name of a third shell company that routes money from Brescia's operation through Draymond's campaign finance structure. A pause. Those transfer notations Valentina found in the margins, the ones in Johnny's handwriting, they include disbursement codes that trace directly to Draymond's PAC. He's been protecting Brescia's entire operation, Avery said. Political cover police cover in a finance structure to clean the money on the way up. Yes, she sat within that for a moment. 3 layers. Brescia on the street, Crow in the department, Draymond in the legislature. Each one protecting the next. Each one positioned high enough that going after any individual layer looked either impossible or politically radioactive. 3 layers and 41 pages of documents with margin annotations that threaded a needle through all of them. Carver, she said. Does she know about Draymond? She is suspected for 2 years, Alejandro said. She had no documentation. She had no witness. She had a theory and a closed door. His voice was very quiet. She has both of those things now. Avery looked out the window at the dark street, in the warehouses, in the distant lights of the port, and she thought about what it meant to be a federal agent who had spent 2 years building a case that kept getting buried and then have 41 pages and a living witness arrive on the same night. Where do you need me? She said. A pause. Torres will bring you to Gianni's location. There is something I need you to hear directly from him and something I need him to confirm directly from you. The tattoo, she said. Voss was at the warehouse tonight, Alejandro said. He came back to deal with Johnny and walked into Marco instead. He's currently in a condition where he is being cooperative. A brief pause that contained something Avery decided not to examine too closely. But I need you to confirm his identity independently. Your testimony and Johnny's testimony together create a chain of witness identification that Carver can use without it looking like it came from my organization. She understood. 2 independent witnesses, one from inside the operation, one from completely outside it. A delivery driver who got shot on a sidewalk was about as outside as it was possible to get. I can do that, she said. Torres was already pulling the vehicle around. They met in a building that Torres called the secondary location, and that Avery would have called a very well-appointed floor of a parking garage that had been converted into something else without any public knowledge of the conversion. She didn't ask. She was getting better at not asking questions about the architecture of Alejandro Vitali's operational infrastructure. Johnny was sitting upright in a chair when she came in, and he looked like a man who had spent several hours on the wrong side of a serious situation. He was in his late 30s, dark circles under his eyes deep enough to look permanent, one side of his jaw swollen. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady, and when he looked up and saw Avery, he looked at her with the complicated expression of someone who knew who she was without having met her. You're the driver, he said. His accent was slight but present. I'm the driver, she confirmed. He looked at her bandaged side. Something moved through his expression. I'm sorry, he said. The order I didn't, there was no way for me to warn anyone about Voss. By the time I understood what Enzo had arranged, they were already watching me. You put the vault code in the notes, she said. She sat down across from him carefully. That was smart. It was the only thing I could do. He looked at his hands. I knew Alejandro would read it. I knew Valentina would recognize it. I just didn't know if it would be fast enough. It was, she said. He nodded, a small exhausted nod. Enzo told them the apartment on Erie was a safe house. He told them 2 weeks ago. He told Brescia many things. How long have you known about Enzo? She asked. 8 months. He looked up. I brought it to Valentina. She said to gather more proof. I went back to gathering proof and Enzo noticed. 3 weeks later, I had 2 of Brescia's people following me everywhere. He paused. I had no proof that Enzo was the source of the surveillance. It looked like coincidence if you didn't know what I knew. So you couldn't move without confirming his suspicion, she said. Exactly. He looked at her steadily. I'm a careful man, Miss Avery, but careful men run out of room eventually. Alejandro appeared from a side room, Marco at his shoulder. He looked at Avery first, then at Johnny, then back at Avery with a question in the look. He's coherent, she said. Incredible. Alejandro nodded. Voss is in the room at the end of the hall. I need you to look at him and confirm the identification. You don't need to speak to him. You don't need to be in the room with him. There's a window. She stood. Her side objected. She walked anyway. The window was a narrow panel of reinforced glass set into a door, the kind of setup that made her not want to ask about the building's history for a second time. Voss was sitting on the other side with his wrists zip-tied to a support bracket and his expression doing the thing expressions did when the person wearing them was calculating options and not finding good ones. He was exactly as tall as she remembered. Exactly the same dark jacket, now significantly worse for wear. She looked at his left wrist. The rook tattoo was there. Black ink clean lines the castle silhouette, precise and deliberate. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking. Impossible to mistake if you were. That's him, she said. Alejandro was beside her. You're certain. The jacket, the height, the build, and the tattoo on the inside of the left wrist. She paused. I can describe the tattoo in specific enough detail to make any alternate explanation difficult. It's not just a rook. There's a hairline crack along the left tower and a small symbol beneath the base. Looks like a stylized letter or a mark. I saw it when he raised his arm. Alejandro looked at her. Duh. You noticed that from a sidewalk at night after being shot. I noticed it in the 2 seconds before I went down, she said. I had nothing else to do while I was falling. She wasn't sure why she said it with the small amount of dark humor she did. She wasn't sure why he received it the way he did either, with that exact shade of expression that was not quite a smile but that lived in the same neighborhood. It lasted less than 2 seconds, and then the weight of the situation reclaimed both of them. We have everything, he said quietly. Johnny's testimony, the documents with the margin annotations, your identification of Voss, and the secondary drive that Torres recovered from Enzo when we picked him up at the Kenilworth address 20 minutes ago. She looked at him. You already moved on Kenilworth. Marco moved on it while Torres was bringing you here. He paused. Enzo is in a room at the other end of this floor. He is not in a condition to be a problem. She processed all of it. The drive, the documents, Gianni alive and talking, Voss identified, Enzo in custody, Draymond's name and Crow's name, and 36 hours worth of organized crime infrastructure sitting in a converted parking garage in the middle of Chicago at 3 a.m. Carver, she said. I'm calling her in 1 hour, he said. After I have spoken with Gianni about the full scope of what he knows, and after the documents are secured in a format that cannot be altered or dismissed as fabricated. He looked at her. When I make that call, I want you present. Your account of tonight needs to come from you directly in your own voice before anyone has a chance to reshape the narrative. You want me on the call with a federal agent. I want a federal agent to hear from a 26-year-old delivery driver who was shot on a public sidewalk, who has a time-stamped delivery record, a medical record, courtesy of Dr. Ferraro, a phone with GPS data from the order acceptance, and a photographic memory of a tattoo on a shooter's wrist. He held her gaze. That witness is not someone Draymond's people can discredit easily. You have no history with any of this. You have no motive to fabricate. You were carrying food. She looked at him for a long moment. The truth of her situation was present in that moment in a way she couldn't avoid. She was 26. She had $412. She was 2 missed shifts away from a very difficult conversation with her landlord. She had been shot on a sidewalk at 11:30 on a Tuesday night for $42 and the terrible luck of being the person who accepted an order at the wrong moment. And now she was in a position to hand a federal agent the key to a case that had been buried for 2 years. A case involving a detective, a senator, and enough financial documentation to make multiple careers very short. She thought about the kind of person who ran from that. "Make the call," she said. Something settled in Alejandro's expression. Not relief exactly, something quieter and more substantial. He turned to Marco. "Get Gianni ready. I want his full account on record before Carver picks up." Then he turned back to Avery. "There's something you should know before this goes to the federal level. When Carver opens this investigation officially, your name is in it. That means protection and it means scrutiny. Your life looks different on the other side of this." "My life already looks different," she said. "It looked different around the time I hit the sidewalk." "Yes," he was quiet. "I want to say something and I want you to hear it clearly." She waited. "I will not let you carry what happened tonight alone," he said. "The exposure, the risk, the cost of whatever comes next, that belongs to me. You were not supposed to be part of this, and I am aware of that every minute." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about how to receive something like that from a person like him. She thought about the difference between a promise made with words and the kind of obligation that lived in the way a person had already been behaving before they said anything at all. "I know," she said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His jaw tightened slightly, which she had learned was not subtle for him. "Crow has escalated the shooting report. He's flagged it as gang-related and requested jurisdiction transfer to major crimes." He looked at Marco. "His people will have access to the delivery platform records within the hour." "He's moving to close the loop," Marco said. "He's moving to close us out of the window," Alejandro said. He looked at Avery. "How long does the cancellation flag I asked you to enter buy us?" "It buys us nothing now," she said. "If he pulls the full account history, the cancellation is there, but so is the acceptance timestamp and the GPS ping from my location when I accepted the order." She paused. "He'll know I was on North Wabash. He'll know the order was canceled from inside a location 2 blocks from the restaurant." She thought for a second. "Unless..." Alejandro looked at her. "The delivery platform has a data request protocol. When law enforcement pulls records, there's a mandatory 24-hour notification to the account holder. It's an automated system. I would get an email." She pulled out her phone. "If I log into my account right now and flag a data privacy concern before the request goes through, it triggers a secondary review process that delays the data release by 48 hours. Can you do that without it looking like you anticipated the request?" Marco said. "I've filed 3 privacy flags in 2 years," she said. "1 for a fraudulent order charge and 2 for GPS tracking disputes. It's normal account behavior for a driver who knows the platform." She was already opening the app. "It won't stop Crow permanently, but it buys Alejandro enough time to get those documents to Carver before Crow can contaminate the timeline." Valentina, who had been standing near the door since they arrived, said quietly, "She thinks like someone who's been 3 steps ahead of a broken system for a long time." Avery submitted the privacy flag without looking up. Confirmation appeared. 48-hour delay on any data release from my account," she said. "Crow's request will sit in a queue until Thursday morning at the earliest." She set the phone down and looked around the room and at the people in it. Marco, who had 11 years and a reset jaw and the loyalty of someone who had chosen it rather than been born into it. Valentina, who had 15 years and a mind that moved faster than it appeared to, and a capacity for grief that she kept compressed and professional. Johnny in his chair with his swollen face and his 8 months of careful documentation and his 6-digit vault code. Torres at the door with his radio and his practiced calm. And Alejandro, who was looking at her phone screen and then at her with the expression she had come to recognize as the one he wore when she did something that recalibrated his understanding of what she was capable of. "Thursday morning," he said. "Thursday morning," she confirmed. He looked at Marco. "Call Carver." Marco put the phone to his ear. Avery sat back carefully and breathed through her side and thought about how 12 hours ago she had been pressing espresso shots and memorizing the names of people who didn't remember hers, and now she was sitting in a converted parking garage at 3:15 in the morning waiting for a federal agent to pick up a call that was about to unravel a state senator. She thought briefly about how she was going to explain this to her sister. Then Marco said, she picked up and held the phone out to Alejandro, and the room went very quiet and Avery straightened in her chair. Agent Carver picked up on the second ring, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been awake for a long time and was not surprised to still be awake. Vitali, she said. No greeting, no preamble, just the name like a file being opened. Carver, Alejandro said. He had the phone on speaker set flat on the table in front of him, and the room around it was very still. I have something you've been looking for. A pause. How long have you had it? Since approximately 11:30 this evening. And you're calling me at 3:20 in the morning. I'm calling you the moment I had enough to make the call worth your time. He looked at the documents on the table, the 41 pages now in a clear protective sleeve that Torres had produced from somewhere with the efficiency of a man who had been preparing for exactly this kind of night for years. I have Gianni Russo in person, coherent, willing to testify with 8 months of documented surveillance on financial transfers between a shell corporation and a state senator's PAC. I have a secondary drive with operational contacts and communication records. I have a named shooter in custody with a confirmed identity. And I have an independent civilian witness with no affiliation to my organization who can corroborate the chain of events from the beginning of the evening. Another pause. Longer this time. Paul Draymond, Carver said. Paul Draymond, Alejandro confirmed. The silence on the line had a different texture after that. It was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of a person who had been right about something for 2 years and was processing what it felt like to finally be able to prove it. Who is the civilian witness? Carver said. Alejandro looked at Avery. Avery leaned slightly toward the phone. My name is Avery Cole, she said. I'm a delivery driver. I accepted an order from Vitali Restaurant at 11:14 this evening. I was shot on North Wabash at approximately 11:30 by a man I can identify by physical description and a distinctive tattoo on his left wrist. That man is currently in this building. I can place him at the scene independently of anyone associated with Mr. Vitali's organization. A beat. You were shot. Through the right side, exit wound. I have a medical record from tonight. And you're conscious and speaking clearly. I'm very annoyed and slightly medicated, but yes. Something changed in Carver's voice. The bureaucratic register dropped a half step towards something more human. Ms. Cole, are you in a safe location? Safer than I was 4 hours ago, Avery said. That's not a standard answer. It's been a non-standard night. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then, I need a location. I'm coming to you, not the other way around. I want to see those documents and I want to speak to Russo before anyone has a chance to move anything or anyone. A pause. And I want to make something clear before I walk in there, Vitali. Say it, Alejandro said. Whatever I find tonight goes into the federal system the moment I touch it. It doesn't come back to you. It doesn't get used as leverage. It goes where it goes, and the outcome is not something either of us controls after that. I know, he said. You're walking away from all of it. The evidence, the witnesses, the narrative. You hand it to me, and it leaves your hands completely. That is what I'm offering you, he said. Yes. Another pause. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Avery watched his face. It was the question she had been carrying since the beginning too, in her own way, not with suspicion, but with the genuine need to understand what a man like this was doing in a position like this at 3 a.m, calling a federal agent and offering to hand over everything without keeping a piece of it. Because I am tired, he said, of carrying the weight of being the only person in this city who knows where the bodies are buried. He paused. And because a woman who was carrying food got shot on my sidewalk, and she deserves to have that mean something. Avery looked at the table. Carver took the address and said she would be there in 35 minutes and disconnected without ceremony, which Avery had come to understand was just how federal agents who meant business ended calls. The room exhaled. Marco sat down for the first time in what felt like hours. Valentina moved to where Johnny was sounding and put her hand on his shoulder briefly, and he looked up at her with the complicated expression of a man who had spent 8 months carrying something alone and had finally been allowed to set it down. Avery looked at Alejandro. He was standing at the table with both hands flat on the surface, again looking at the documents, and she could see the particular quality of stillness that was not peace but was something adjacent to it, the stillness of a decision fully made. "You meant that," she said quietly. "What you told Carver." He looked up. "Which part?" "The tired part." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I meant it." She believed him. Not because he said it, but because of how he said it without performance, without the careful modulation he used for most things. It came out flat and real and worn at the edges the way true things did when people stopped managing them. She had 100 questions she could have asked. She asked none of them. There was time for those, or there wasn't, and either way, this was not the moment. "Gianni," she said, turning to him, "the disbursement codes in the margins, the ones that connect to Draymond's PAC, are there corresponding bank records that Carver can subpoena to validate them independently?" Gianni looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between exhaustion and respect. "3 accounts, 2 in Delaware, 1 in the Caymans. The routing sequences are in the codes. A forensic accountant can follow the chain inside of 2 days." He paused. "I memorized the account numbers when I realized I couldn't keep written records safely." "You memorized federal evidence," Avery said. "I memorized survival," he said simply. "Give them to me." She pulled out her phone and opened a notes app. "Say them once clearly. I'll write them down separately from your testimony, so Carver has a redundant record that came from a different person on a different device." Johnny looked at Alejandro. Alejandro nodded. Johnny said the numbers. Avery wrote them down carefully and read them back, and he confirmed each one without hesitation. She forwarded the note to an email address she used only for important documents, a habit from her criminology years, when she had learned early that the only copy that mattered was the one in 3 different places. "Done," she said. Valentina was looking at her with that steady measuring expression she had worn since the apartment on Erie. "You're going to be very difficult to forget," she said. It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it wasn't only an observation either. "I'll take that," Avery said. The 35 minutes passed faster than they should have, which was the nature of time when everything was moving. Tora stood near the entrance. Marco briefed Johnny on what to say, and more importantly, what not to say, the operational details that were irrelevant to Carver's case, and relevant only to people who didn't need to know them. Alejandro sat with Johnny for 20 minutes in a private conversation that Avery did not try to hear, and when he came back, his expression was different, in a way she couldn't fully name. Something settled, something that had been open for a long time, quietly closed. Carver arrived in 32 minutes, which told Avery she had started driving before she hung up. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, gray-brown hair, wearing civilian clothes over the particular alertness of someone who was never fully off duty. She came in with one other agent, a younger man she introduced as Santos, and she took the room in with a single sweep of attention that was purely professional and entirely complete. She looked at the documents first, then at Gianni, then at Avery, then at Alejandro. She did it in that order, and the order told a story about her priorities. "Ms. Cole," she said, "I'd like to speak with you separately before I take the full briefing." Avery stood. Her side ached with the steady insistence it had maintained all night. She followed Carver to the far end of the room, out of earshot of the table. Carver looked at her directly. No warm-up, no preliminary warmth. "How did you end up here?" "I accepted a delivery order," Avery said. "I was shot before I could complete it. Mr. Vitali's people helped me, and in the process of understanding what happened, I became involved in what was already happening." "Did anyone pressure you to be here tonight?" "No." "Did anyone offer you compensation for your testimony?" "No." "Are you here voluntarily and with full understanding that speaking to me constitutes a formal witness interaction that may be subpoenaed?" "Yes." Carver looked at her for a moment. "You're very calm." "I've been told that 3 times tonight," Avery said. "I think at this point it's just biology." Something moved behind Carver's eyes, not quite humor, closer to recognition. "I'm going to need a formal statement, tonight while everything is current. That means time. Are you physically able?" "Ask me again in an hour," Avery said. "That's not a yes." "It's a yes with a timeline." Carver held her gaze for another beat. Then she said, "The tattoo on the shooter's wrist. Tell me about it." Avery told her, every detail. The exact dimensions she estimated the crack along the left tower, the small symbol at the base that she had seen for less than 2 seconds, and filed with the precision of a mind that had always worked that way for better and sometimes for worse. Carver listened without writing anything down, which told Avery she was also the kind of person who remembered what she heard the first time. That tattoo, Carver said when Avery finished, is consistent with a mark used by a private security contractor that Brescia has employed for 4 years. 3 members of that contractor group have been on my radar for 18 months. She paused. I could not connect them to Brescia without a witness who could place one of them at a specific incident. Her voice was very level. You have just done that. Avery absorbed the weight of that. That's more than I knew when I was falling. Most people don't know what they know until someone asks them the right questions, Carver said. That's why witness testimony matters. She went back to the table. Avery followed. What happened next was the most methodical 2 hours of Avery's life, which was saying something given the previous 4. Carver worked through Gianni's account with the systematic precision of someone who had been building a case in her head for 2 years and was now receiving every brick she had been missing. She asked questions that were precise and often double-backed on themselves, checking for consistency, checking for the kind of detailed coherence that fabrication couldn't sustain over long periods of time. Gianni answered everything. His voice got steadier as the conversation went on, which Avery recognized as what happened when someone who had been carrying something secret for a long time was finally allowed to put it down in front of people with the authority to do something with it. Alejandro sat across from Carver and gave her a formal account that was spare and honest and contained none of the things that weren't her business. She pushed twice on the edges of what he offered. Both times he held the line with a calm that was not defiant but was completely firm. She accepted both limits with the professionalism of someone who understood where the boundaries of a deal lived. At 4:57 in the morning, Carver opened her phone and made a call. It lasted 45 seconds. When she ended it, she looked at Alejandro with an expression that had changed from operational assessment to something that was almost frank. Crow is being picked up right now, she said. A federal warrant, issued 40 minutes ago based on the preliminary documentation Santos forwarded from here. She paused. By the time he knows what's happening, the documents will be in federal custody, and his access to the platform data request will be suspended pending investigation. The room was quiet. Then Marco made a sound that was not a word, but that carried the weight of 11 years of waiting for an operation to go correctly at the end of a very long night. Draymond, Alejandro said, is a more complicated process, Carver said. A sitting state senator requires a different warrant threshold. But we have enough to open the federal inquiry tonight, and once that inquiry is formally open, his ability to interfere with it becomes obstruction. She looked at Gianni. Mr. Russo, your testimony and the documentary evidence you provided will be central to that process. I need you to understand that this is going to take time. Months. Possibly longer. I understand, Gianni said. He looked at Alejandro. I've been waiting 8 months. I can wait longer. Alejandro looked back at him. Something passed between them that was years old and complicated and not entirely resolved and probably never would be. But it was honest, and in Avery's experience, that was more valuable than resolved. Carver stood. She looked at Avery last. Ms. Cole, I'm arranging protective detail for you, starting immediately. Not optional, given Voss and the potential remaining members of Brescia's organization who are not yet in custody. She paused. I am also assigning you a victim's advocate and a federal witness liaison. They will contact you today. Today is already today, Avery said. Yes, Carver said. It is. A pause that felt like something close to warmth. You did well tonight. I want you to know that. What you remembered and what you were able to articulate is the kind of witness account that makes cases. Not dramatic, just precise and honest and consistent. She paused. That's rarer than people think. Avery looked at the table for a moment. She thought about 4 years of delivery shifts and a degree she couldn't use and a checking account with $412 in it and a bike on North Wabash that was probably still there chained to its pole, entirely indifferent to the night that had happened around it. Thank you, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Carver and Santos left with the documents and in a sealed case that Torres had provided Voss in federal custody transport, and Enzo Marchetti in a secondary vehicle under arrest on charges Carver listed with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been building the list for a long time. Brescia Torres told them 10 minutes later had been picked up at the Kenilworth address by two additional federal agents who had been dispatched from Carver's field office while she was in the building with them. He had opened his door at 4:40 in the morning in a bathrobe and had apparently said absolutely nothing. The kind of nothing that meant he already understood. The drive was in federal custody. The documents were in federal custody. 3 of the 4 layers of the operation, Voss, Crow, and Brescia, were in custody or en route. Draymond was not yet, but his name was in a federal inquiry that now existed in the official record and could not be quietly removed. The room felt different after Carver left, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with air and everything to do with weight. Gianni fell asleep in his chair within 10 minutes, which was the most human thing Avery had seen all night. Valentina covered him with a jacket and didn't say anything about it. Marco sat down at the table with a cup of coffee Torres had produced from somewhere and stared at the middle distance with the look of a man downloading the night in reverse. Alejandro came and stood beside Avery near the window, not close enough to crowd her. The same distance as the chair in the office, considered deliberate, giving her room. "It's almost 5, he said. "I know. You missed your shift. Several of them at the rate this is going." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was doing what it always did at this hour, running on reduced power, not sleeping exactly, just breathing at a lower rate. Trucks and early walkers in the first garbage collection runs. Chicago at 5 in the morning was the only version of it that ever felt like it was taking a breath. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "The criminology degree. The things you couldn't use it for." He paused. "What did you want to do with it?" Before the job market had opinions. She hadn't expected that question. She turned it over for a moment. "I wanted to work in victim advocacy," she said. "Criminal justice reform. The part of the system that doesn't get funded because it doesn't make anyone feel powerful." She paused. "I wanted to work with people who got caught in the machinery of things they didn't choose." He was looking at her with that particular attentiveness that she had stopped being surprised by. "You're good at that," he said. "I haven't done it," she said. "You did it tonight," he said. "With Gianni, with the way you talked to him, the way you asked him questions that were precise without making him feel interrogated. The way you took down the account numbers separately so he wasn't the only record." He paused. "That is advocacy. That is what it looks like in practice. A beat. You've been doing it all your life, I think. You just haven't had the room for it." Avery looked at the floor for a moment because the accuracy of it was a particular kind of uncomfortable. The kind that came from being seen clearly by someone who had no reason to look carefully and did anyway. "I have a contact," he said, "a non-profit legal organization. They work on wrongful conviction cases and systemic accountability. They have been looking for someone who understands how the delivery economy works, how platform workers get used by systems that don't protect them, how ordinary people end up as collateral in criminal structures they never saw coming." He paused. "After tonight, you understand that better than most." She looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm telling you a door exists," he said. "Whether you walk through it is entirely your decision." A pause. "I will not pretend I have no interest in you remaining in a position where our paths might intersect again. That would be dishonest." He held her gaze. "But that is separate from the door. The door is real regardless of anything else." She looked at him for a long moment. Alejandro Vitali, who owned 6 restaurants and had enemies and carried dangerous things quietly and sat in a chair at a careful distance from a bleeding stranger because he wanted her to feel like she could breathe. Who had called a federal agent at 3 in the morning and handed over everything without keeping a piece of it because he said he was tired. And she believed him. She was not naive. She understood what he was, and she understood the shape of the world he moved through, and she had no illusions about the distance between that world and the one she wanted to build. But she had also spent 4 years moving through a city that ran on invisible labor and unacknowledged people, and she had seen tonight what happened when the invisible became suddenly visible. And she had felt in the middle of all the fear and pain and adrenaline something that she recognized from the textbooks and the coursework in the late nights reading case files in the library. Something that felt like the specific fierce satisfaction of being exactly where the work was. I want the contact information, she said, and I want to be clear that I'm interested in the door for its own reasons, not for any of the other reasons. I know, he said. You don't look offended. I'm not. He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I would have been more concerned if you said otherwise. She almost laughed. It surprised her enough that she pressed her lips together to stop it, and he watched that happen, with the expression she had come to think of as his version of a smile, the one that never quite finished, but was entirely present in the seconds before it would have. Marco looked up from his coffee. The sun is coming up, he said, to no one in particular, to all of them. He was right. The window at the far end of the room was shifting from black to the specific deep blue of early morning, the color of the sky made before it committed to daylight. Torres was on his phone. Johnny was still asleep. Valentina was standing at the window with her coffee and her 15 years and her exhausted grace. Avery looked at her phone. 5:14. She had one message from her sister sent at 1 in the morning. You okay? You're usually done with your shift by now. She had not answered it. She would answer it now. She typed, I'm okay. Long story. Can I come over later this morning? She sent it and set the phone down. Your sister, Alejandro said. He had seen her typing. She worries, Avery said. She's a kindergarten teacher. Worrying is the professional baseline. You should see her, he said. Today, don't wait. Something in his voice was quieter than usual, more personal. The people who wait for you to be safe, they carry the waiting in ways you don't always see. She looked at him. There was something in that sentence that was not entirely about her sister, and she did not ask about it because she did not have to. I know, she said. The room settled around them, the long compound silence of a night that had been too loud for too long finally finding its way to the other side. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He looked at Alejandro. Carver, he said, text message. Alejandro looked at him. Marco read it aloud. Crow in custody, cooperative. Warrant for Draymond signed and being executed now. Federal news embargo until 6 a.m. You have 45 minutes. The room absorbed that. 45 minutes before the story became public. Before the name Paul Draymond appeared in a news alert on the phones of everyone in Chicago who had ever voted for him or funded him or protected him or simply assumed that the people who held power in their city were doing something with it that deserved the name governance. He's going to say it was fabricated, Valentina said. His people will say it within the hour. His people will say it, Alejandro agreed. And a federal judge signed the warrant at 4:58 this morning, which means the documentation was credible enough to clear that threshold before anyone said anything. He looked at Marco. Draymond can say whatever he wants. The 41 pages say more. Avery thought about Johnny's handwriting in the margins, the account number she had in 3 different places, the GPS data on her phone, the medical record, the delivery timestamp, the tattoo she had described in enough detail to identify a man from 2 seconds of falling. Evidence did not need to argue. It only needed to exist in the right hands. Her phone buzzed. Her sister, of course. Come whenever. I'll make breakfast. Avery read it twice and felt something loosen in her chest that had been held tight since she hit the sidewalk. The ordinary human warmth of a sister who would make breakfast without asking questions and ask the questions later when there was coffee and light and the room felt safe enough to hold them. She stood. Her side ached with the familiarity of something she was going to be managing for weeks. She stood straight anyway because that was also biology now, the same as the calm. She looked around the room. Torres at his post, Marco with his phone and his coffee and 11 years, Valentina at the window with her grace and her grief and her 15 years. Johnny asleep in his chair, finally safe in the way that was only possible on the other side of telling the truth out loud to someone with the power to do something with it. And Alejandro, who was watching her with the full and careful weight of his attention, the same way he had watched her from that chair in the back room of the restaurant when the night was just beginning, and she was bleeding and furious and not yet sure whether to trust a single thing about any of it. She held his gaze. I'll be in touch, she said. I know you will, he said. She walked out into a Chicago morning that was cold and blue, and beginning, and the city received her the way it always had, without ceremony, without apology, with the specific indifference of a place that kept moving regardless of what happened inside it. She had a bike on North Wabash, and a sister in Wicker Park, and a door that had been described to her in a room at 5 in the morning by a man who carried dangerous things and had chosen finally to put them down. She had been shot. She had been used. She had been placed inside a machine that had no intention of including her and had included herself anyway, had refused to be managed or moved aside or left out of the conversation that her own blood had paid to enter. And when it mattered, when the federal agent asked her questions in a room at 4 in the morning, she had been precise and honest and consistent, which was rarer than people thought, and which she had always been even when no one was asking. Avery Cole walked toward the morning, knowing that the night had changed the shape of everything, and that the shape it had changed into was one she could stand in fully, without apology, with the kind of clarity that only came from having been tested by something real and not being found wanting. She was 26 years old. She had $412, and she had just handed a federal agent the key to a case that would take down a senator, a detective in the operation that had been running under this city like something buried for years, rotting the ground from underneath. She had done it with a broken side and a delivery app, and a memory that had never let her down, and a refusal to be anybody's collateral damage without a fight. That was enough. More than enough. That was exactly who she had always been, finally in a place that required her to be it fully, and she walked forward into the blue Chicago morning and did not look back.